Hello and welcome to another action-packed, exciting hour of the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Re-Watch-Along Project. This is podcasting the way it used to be and the way you like it. This show is a production of the Something Else Podcasting Network, and it is episode number 050 of Smoky Mountain Wrestling from January 9th, 1993, taped December 12th, 1992, at the East High School in Morristown, Tennessee. My name is Arya, and welcome to the show. Now, in case you've never checked out the Smoky Mountain Re-Watch-Along Project, what we do here, it is really quite simple. We talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, the so-so, the okay, the wonderful, the tremendous, the all right, the whatever, the unforgettable, the unbelievable, the stuff you've already forgotten, the stuff you'll never forget, and everything in between. And we watched Smoky Mountain Wrestling beginning with episode number 1 on February 1st, 1992. We go all the way to episode number 200 on November 26th, 1995. And yes, as I've implied, this is episode number 50, which means that yes, there are 49 episodes in the can. So you can go back and listen to every single one of them. And they're on every single streaming platform that we have. It's, of course, at angrymarks.com. It's on YouTube at tinyurl.com/something else YouTube. And we're also available on all your favorite streaming platforms and even the ones you didn't know exist. We're on Spotify. We're on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Essentially, if you have the ability to listen to a podcast, you could be listening to this show, which you already are, else you wouldn't be listening to me run it down like this, now would you? Anyway, so we've been back on our RSS feed now for a few weeks, and I've gotten a lot of really good results. I want to thank everybody who's listening, especially if you're a brand new listener. Hope you've been enjoying it. Hope you continue to enjoy it. We, of course, do 2 free shows every single week. They come out Wednesday and Thursday morning. The Wednesday show, we talk about Mid-South Wrestling and World Class Wrestling. And on Thursdays, we talk about Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And other than the show seemingly rotating what day it drops, we've been pretty consistent for a year for both of these shows here. And actually, something else is coming up on its 2-year mark in August. It's our birthday month coming in a few months. But we'll get into all that here in a few months. But for now, let's go into the action. This is not so much a famous episode of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. It has a famous moment in Smoky Mountain Wrestling history. And it's one of those things, if you've been listening the last few weeks, you knew this was coming up. And if you've no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry, it's coming. We'll get to it. But let's go to the intro right now with Bob Caudle and Dutch Mantell, who are going to preview what we're going to see today on this very program.
Wrestling fans, welcome to another action-packed, exciting hour of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Professional wrestling the way it used to be and the way you like it. I'm Bob Caudle, and we've got a special edition of Smoky Mountain Wrestling for all you fans this week from our hometown base in Morristown, Tennessee. We're going to be going back and looking at some of the events that happened at Christmas Chaos. We got a tremendous main event for all you wrestling fans this week. And Dutch Mantell, my tag partner here, what about down and dirty, Dutch?
Okay, my special guest today for all the fans here in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, the legendary Ron Wright will be with us, and he's got a real good special announcement for all you fans. Plus the main event today, only on Smoky Mountain, the Hands of Stone Ronnie Garvin and Tim Horner are going to be taking on the team of the Dirty White Boy and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff right here today.
All right, and Dutch, Smoky Mountain Commissioner Bob Armstrong is right here with us. And Commissioner Armstrong, I understand you got some big news about a big special match that'll take place right here next week on Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
You're right, Bob. Next week, for the first time, we'll make history right here. We'll crown a TV champion in a Beat the Champ TV title match. Now, 4 men have been selected at random. They are Jimmy Golden, Killer Kyle, Mr. Tracy Smothers, and the Dirty White Boy. That match will all take place, and by the end of next week's TV program, we'll have our first Smoky Mountain TV heavyweight champion.
Exciting things, fans, are happening right here on Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Now, we're going to be back. We'll have more. You stay with us right now. Let's take this time out.
Okay. So the way they word it, it sounds a little wacky, a little wonky. It sounds like this is going to be similar to last week, where it's kind of a best of, or it's going to be a recap show. It's really not. This is essentially just a regular episode of Smoky Mountain Wrestling that does, in fact, have some highlights of Christmas Chaos. Now, part of what makes it confusing, just a little bit, is that they announced that the main event this week is Ronnie Garvin and Tim Horner versus Paul Orndorff and Dirty White Boy, which was a match that was held at every Christmas Chaos show. So I know when I first watched this and I was getting ready to go, I figured, they're just going to air, one of the matches from Christmas Chaos, or at least air highlights, because all those matches, with the stipulation that what the title's on the line the first 30 minutes, every match went like 32, 33 minutes, and they were not going to put a 33-minute taped house show match on one of these episodes. But no, this was a technically brand new match. Of course, it was taped a few weeks before Christmas Chaos, but this match is not one of the matches from the Christmas Chaos tour. It's completely different, brand new, and it's right here on TV this week. Now, Bullet Bob comes in and announces that after weeks of speculation, next week, we're going to have our 4-way elimination match to determine the first ever Beat the Champ TV champion. It's Jimmy Golden, Killer Kyle, Tracy Smothers, and Dirty White Boy. Dirty White Boy, the heavyweight champion of Smoky Mountain, trying to get double gold next week in this TV title elimination match. Now, here's the thing, and I don't want to accuse Mr. Bullet Bob Armstrong of any shenanigans, any underhanded deeds, but these all these Beat the Champ TV title matches, even the first one here, it's supposed to be a blind draw. And so in theory, at least to me, you should be doing this in front of the people so the crowd sees it, so they know, hey, this is on the up and up. The people in charge can't just be, being all willy-nilly with, the rules here. But no, this was done backstage, out of the way. Makes you wonder if there were any other witnesses, and if those witnesses were Brian Hildebrand and Sandy Scott, who are the other board of director members, who we've also know that they're essentially in Bullet Bob's pocket. But that could be a controversy. It's not going to be, but it could be. All right. So from there, they run down the rules again of the Beat the Champ. We've talked about it. Winner gets $1,000. They defend for up to 5 weeks. If they win for 5 weeks, they get $5,000, and we go from there. And so we come back, and Bullet Bob has left the interview area, but in has walked Primetime Brian Lee and the Mongolian Stomper.
All right, fans, with us right now, here's the Mongolian Stomper, Primetime Brian Lee. Brian, of course, you guys, with Kevin Sullivan, you guys have been having some really, really tough times.
Tough times isn't the word for it. If you look here, you see my ribs aren't 100%. And Kevin Sullivan, you didn't get the job done because Primetime Brian Lee's still right here in your face. You have Night Stalker at your side. Night Stalker, you have everything it takes to be a good wrestler. You're big, strong, and even a great athlete, but you don't have a mind because Kevin Sullivan's leading you around like a dog. But when you want to talk about lunatics, look at my partner here. He has not one brain cell left. It doesn't matter to him. He tears it from head to toe. So I'll tell you what, Kevin Sullivan, I don't know where and I don't know when, but when Primetime Brian Lee gets his hands on you, it's curtains for you, Daddy. And I'll tell you what, and I've said it 100 times and I'll say it again, you're good, but you're not ready for prime time.
All right, and talking about that, fans, we want to go back right now. Let's look at some of the action that took.
All right. So Lee, by the way, during this interview, he lifts up his shirt and shows the rib tape, the Diamond Dallas Page brand rib tape, that's all over his body here. And from there, it's a Primetime Brian Lee promo. They're not the greatest promos in the world, but they're certainly better than other top baby faces that we have in this company. not naming any names, Tim Horner. But, he breaks out his normal catchphrase that Sullivan's good, but he's not ready for prime time. And from there, they go to a match from Christmas Chaos. I believe this was the Knoxville match. Kevin Sullivan dressed as Santa Claus and Night Stalker versus Primetime Brian Lee and the Mongolian Stomper. Sullivan attacks Brian Lee and then joins in on beating Stomper on the outside. Literally, as soon as the three of them are outside the ring, they turn the lights down and they manage to be in an area where you can't even see them because the only light is over the ring. Because before that, it was a lit up arena, and mind you, didn't look that great. But, if they're going to be wrestling where they were, it was better to have the lights on than the lights off. Let's just leave it at that. So Brian Lee beats on the Night Stalker with a chair, which causes Mark Curtis to call for a disqualification. Stomper then throws the table into the ring and the heels bail. Pardon me, and the heels bail. So, God damn it. Sorry about that. Stupid cough of mine won't go away. So the issue here is they announced a few weeks ago, you might recall, that these tag team matches with Sullivan and Night Stalker versus Brian Lee and Mongolian Stomper were all non-sanctioned, no disqualification, anything goes. And turns out not all of them were. So yeah, I think there are 3 or 4 Christmas Chaos shows. I think there are 4, but all of them were no disqualification, anything goes matches, except the Knoxville match, which really makes absolutely no sense, but that's what it was. And so Sullivan and the Night Stalker technically win in Knoxville by disqualification. And I mean, I don't even know, because it's not like, they were advertising it any differently, because, we've seen these shows now for weeks, and it's been flat out said that these matches are going to be no DQ, anything goes, yada, yada, yada. And then it's like, not even like they changed their mind about all of them. They changed their mind about just this one. And I don't know. I think it's another, kind of bait and switch thing. And I think corny, and this is an issue it gets a lot worse about. And obviously, this is, in the grand scheme of things, this is a minor thing. But one of the things that, in my opinion, helps kill Smoky Mountain Wrestling is that they bait and switch a lot with stipulations. And there are some very egregious moments over the next couple of years that, they kind of screwed people over on. But after this match, we go back to Bob Caudle, who's now with Kevin Sullivan and the Night Stalker.
All right, fans, and that's just a little bit of what happened there at Christmas Chaos. And you heard from Primetime Brian Lee about these two here. They are the master, Kevin Sullivan, and the Night Stalker. Stalker?
Brian Lee, you had the opportunity of a lifetime, but you've made a grave mistake. You came out of the hospital just a little too early. You're not ready. You can't beat this team. I don't care who you bring. Commissioner Bob Armstrong, you can get him. He can't help you. The Mongolian Stomper, he can't help you either. There's no one, anywhere, who can beat the Master and the Night Stalker, because you see, the family is just not in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. The family is all over the entire world. Master, share some knowledge with these people who don't know what they're doing.
Brian Lee, let me ask you this. Was Christmas and Santa good to you? It's Stomper. Somebody told me at Christmas time you got stuck in the chimney and got singed. Well, this is to Bob Armstrong. You can bring them in from all over the world. You can bring the Stompers. You can bring the Mongolians, the whole family, along with Brian Lee. You see, Bob Armstrong, you've really put the pressure on me. You've made me a sick individual. I don't like to go out and take spikes and spike people. You see Bob Armstrong 6 times this week. 6, count them, 6 times. I went to the psychiatrist and laid down. He told me, you're like a father figure, Bob Armstrong. I hated my father, Bob Armstrong. I hated him. It's you.
It's okay, Master. Everyone hated your father. It's not your fault. It's not your fault of what happened to your father.
It's okay, Bob Armstrong.
That's not your fault.
I'll tell you this, Bob Armstrong. Everybody pays. Everybody pays all the time. Brian Lee, take a look at this. Mongolian Stomper, take a look at this. Because when you lay your weary head down at night, you're gonna have nightmares.
Fans, we'll be back. We'll have action right after this.
So Kevin Sullivan, I'll be honest, in a company full of great talkers at this point, you have Bullet Bob, you have Cornette, you have Tracy Smothers, who's great, you have Ricky Morton, who's fantastic. Kevin Sullivan may easily be the best promo in the company. And, oh yeah, you also have Mr. Ron Wright. You have Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. All these people who can fucking talk. Makes me wonder why we keep listening to Horner. But, you know, you have all these great people who can talk. I honestly think Sullivan is the best at this point. Like, this guy, like, I know, like, nobody breaks character, per se. But no one does a better job at more believably getting over their character. Not even Tracy Smothers being the good old down-home southern redneck. Honestly, I'd have an easier time believing that he was a Yankee than I'd have believing that Kevin Sullivan was sane. This motherfucker plays a crazy nut job better than anybody you've ever seen. And in a way, it's honestly sad that it's like, and I know he had a great career. You know, I know he had a great career, you know, before the days of national wrestling. But it's sad that, you know, if he was 10 years younger, you know, and honestly, his height probably would have done him in too. But, you know, ignoring that, if he was 10 years younger, he would have fucking, like, you know, I think, like, people would easily be talking about him as not just, you know, one of, like, say, the top 100 or top 200. They'd be talking about, like, top 20, top 10. Because part of the problem is Sullivan, he didn't have a national run. And, like, I mean, he had the national run in WCW, NWA, and, like, 88 and 89 at the Varsity Club. But that was also when he was already on the downswing. He didn't have a national run until he was on the end of his career. And by that point, it's like, it's, you know, 95, 96, 97. It's with the cartoonish Dungeon of Doom that everyone basically writes off, ignoring the fact that Sullivan did a fucking amazing job with it. But, you know, it's kind of sad that most of his best stuff, you know, I'm assuming it's all his Florida stuff, it's like, you don't really get a chance to see that. And no, I'm not starting a Florida wrestling podcast. I've already got 2, 3, 4, however many goddamn podcasts I have these days. But yeah, it's like, he's just like, he says how Bullet Bob can bring wrestlers from all over the world, and he can put all the pressure he wants on Sullivan. Sullivan talks about us 6 times this week. He went to the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist said Bob was like a father figure. And Sullivan gets down on the ground, and we've seen him do this a couple times, especially when talking about his trips to the psychiatrist. He goes, lays down on the ground, and he screams that he didn't like his father. Night Stalker soothes him by saying everybody hates Sullivan's father. And, you know, Sullivan screams that everybody pays all the time. Like, it is sad that wrestling was in such shit shape in the early 90s, because it's like, stuff like this is where it's like, you know, this should have been so much more popular than it was. It's not even funny. And, you know, we'll get through it, but, you know, Smoky Mountain kind of had reached what it was going to reach, I guess, especially in the early 90s. In fact, you could say it overreached, you know, for the time period. But we've got some really good shit here, and we're going to have some more really good shit as the months and years go by. So we're suddenly whisked away to the ring as we come back from the commercial with two men already in the ring and the bell ringing. And it is not actor Jeff Daniels, who was last seen a few weeks ago getting his ass kicked and left bloodied by Kevin Sullivan and Night Stalker. And I honestly thought that was it for him, but apparently I was wrong. Versus a man who got no introduction, but he was eventually called Chris Comet. Chris Comet, I don't think this guy's lasting long. I must tell you that. But they were trying to put him over big here. He does a tope out of the ring to Daniels. He uses a crucifix for a near fall, but then he fell down when he tried to do the Owen Hart move, where you grab the guy's wrist, you go to the top rope, flip off, and then flip over your opponent. You've seen Owen Hart do it in 8 million matches. He tried doing it here and he fell down. And I guess they couldn't cover it up that easily, but oh well. Comet wins with a Hurricanrana, and my note is they're both very green. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but on this show where you're following, Kevin Sullivan, you're following even primetime Brian Lee, the Mongolian Stomper. We had that tag team match earlier. You're following that. It's hard because it's a big step down, even with the crappy finish of our opening match. All right. So here we go. This has been building up for weeks. This segment takes 1 minute and 55 seconds and is perhaps either the most famous thing Tim Horner did in Smoky Mountain Wrestling or the second most famous behind his singing. We're going to have a segment now to recap in case, you haven't been watching or in case you, forgotten. Tim Horner wrestled Dirty White Boy about a month ago on TV for the title. Horner got the pin, but White Boy's foot was on the ropes. Horner took the title belt instead of because the referee was trying to get his attention and saying, hey, their foot is on the ropes, come back. He just leaves with the title belt. And we spent weeks having this joke where it's like Horner doesn't know where the title belt was. And then 2 weeks ago, because last week was a best of, 2 weeks ago, Horner does a promo from a couch with a sick child named JT. It's this kid, he's been in and out of the hospital, and the wrestlers kind of have taken the kid under his wing behind this, the scenes. They've taken the kid under his wings and, they put him in Smoky Mountain gear and basically doing everything they can to give this, to have a fan for life kind of thing. Now, Horner cut a promo 2 weeks ago that I questioned whether or not it should have ever aired. And especially because it then led to this, where Horner cut a promo sitting on a couch with JT, this kid, and he basically says that the title belongs to JT. All right. So with that, because the title still belongs to Dirty White Boy. With that, Bullet Bob Armstrong has arrived with Bob Caudle, and Bullet Bob has something to say, and we're just going to play it, and then we're going to talk about it afterwards.
Right now here is, again, Smoky Mountain Commissioner Bob Armstrong. Commissioner Armstrong.
Well, everybody's really excited about the TV title match here to be held next week. But
right.
We've got another problem, Bob, is that's our Smoky Mountain Heavyweight title belt now. Tim Horner took that belt here 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I've asked Tim where the belt is, and Tim said, I don't know where the belt is. I took him at his word, but I think Tim's man enough and upfront enough that he'll bring that belt back because rules are rules. Yeah. He's got to bring the belt back, and it's got to be won according to our rules. If we don't have those to go by, then what have we got to go by?
Yeah, and Tim, I know, is the type of guy, he wants a belt, but he wants to win a belt and have it. And here is Tim Horner, and I guess a friend of Tim's, and that's what you've been looking for, Commissioner. There's the belt. Tim?
You know something, Bob? Professional wrestling is a tough sport. The object of the game is to pin your opponent for a 3 count, and I know, Commissioner, you know that as well as anybody. And I think that's what I did a few weeks ago. Everybody's wanting to know where the belt's been. I didn't have it. This fella right here had it. But I'll tell you something. I know you've got your job to do. Right is right and wrong is wrong, and I'm man enough to come out here. If it's right, it's right, and if it's wrong, it's wrong. And if we got to give this belt back, that's what we do. But I guarantee you the next time, Dirty White Boy, there won't be any discrepancies. I'll beat you for the 3 count, and this belt will be mine, and it'll be my buddies here, JT's.
Tim, I appreciate you coming out. Tim Horner's much of a man, and I appreciate it. If I had my way about it, that little gentleman could keep this belt forever. But I'm going to give Tim Horner another chance, and if he beats that white boy this time, no if and buts, where, who, or whenever, he'll get this belt. I'll give it to him myself, and he can do with it what he pleases.
All right, fans, that's the story about the belt.
So, Tim Horner brought out a small child who we've acknowledged and established on television. This kid has gone through a myriad of health issues. I'm almost 40 years old, and I've gone through a lot of shit in my life. This kid, 7, 8, 9 years old, however old he was, he's gone through far more than I have. No lies. Not even, not even gonna sugarcoat it here. Horner brings him out with the title belt, and he makes Bullet Bob Armstrong, our babyface Hall of Fame commissioner, the legend of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, the guy that, we're building up to eventually bring out of retirement, but specifically, he's a fucking legend. He's a popular babyface in this Alabama, Tennessee area. And we made this man take the championship belt from a sick child. And I don't say dying child, because I don't know if, he, was that serious that he was actually dying. I mean, it had to be serious enough that he's spending so much time in the hospital. But Horner made Bullet Bob take the championship belt from a sickly child, a child who's had to get multiple surgeries, a child who is the fucking most sympathetic babyface on the fucking, in the fucking company right now. And Horner made this happen. Now, before he became the, scourge of half of the wrestling world, Jim Cornette, 5, 6, 7 years ago, did a segment on his show, and it's available on YouTube, where he basically recapped Tim Horner and Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And it's 28 minutes. And I know it sounds like a long time, but it's well worth going on your way to listen to. And he basically talks about how Bob was fucking pissed when he went backstage. And apparently nobody knew that Horner was going to do this. And while I believe nobody knew Horner was going to do this, at the same time, it's like the way they set it up, that's how it made sense. By allowing that Horner promo from 2 weeks ago to air, where Horner gave the title belt to this kid, that it basically was like, okay, we're going to come out on TV and they're going to have to take the belt from this kid. And the fucked up thing is, like, if Cornette would have known that this was what was going to happen, they could have easily, redone it. And it took me 10 seconds to think about. Instead of having Bob come out and take the belt, you end up having Dirty White Boy come out and take the fucking belt. He's already the fucking heel. He's already the asshole. And here he is now ripping the belt away from a sick, cancer-ridden child. Like, what an asshole. But instead, Horner doesn't tell anybody. He doesn't think, like he says, he doesn't think it's a big deal. Horner just, honestly, like, this was ridiculous. And if Horner didn't understand this, then this guy was a fucking idiot. Even more so than, we always say that he was. Like, if he can't figure out that this might be a bad idea for a babyface commissioner to take the belt from a sick child, then dude, you're a fucking idiot. Because literally, all you had to do was have Horner come out with the kid. Bullet Bob's already there, and basically, Bob is like trying to basically not even say please, say he's got to give the belt up, etc. And you have Dirty White Boy come out. He can sneak up from behind if you want. He can come up face to face, and instead, and at this point, you have Bob kind of surreptitiously step to the side, so he's on the side with Tim Horner, and you have Dirty White Boy across from him, and you have White Boy reach out and grab the belt from him. It's like it would have been so much easier, and I guarantee if Cornette knew what was going to happen, Cornette would have done something like that. But instead, Horner needed to get himself over in his hometown where he was barely over to begin with. Because while he's popular in his hometown, we'll see, he's not the most popular wrestler in these tapings. But so Horner put another nail in his coffin because he's already pissing off the boys. He's already, making shit up, telling them wrong shit. And, I don't say he doesn't have long because he's still here for another year, a year and a half. But it's easy to see why there was a division between Tim Horner and pretty much everybody else in the company. So from here, it's down and dirty with Dutch, and his guest this week is Mr. Ron Wright. Actually, we're not going to play the beginning because the beginning is just him introducing Ron Wright and then pitching it to a video of, let me see here. Okay, all right. So, Mr. Wright says he's honored to be on the best segment in wrestling. He says Dirty White Boy's beaten everybody in the country, and he'll have the TV title. And from here, they want to talk about Reno Riggins. They talk about Reno Riggins. We've talked about Reno in the past few weeks. That of all the people who are enhancement talent, he's, in my opinion, easily the most talented of the enhancement talent. And they're wondering why they don't ever do anything with him. So we show the highlight video, and then we come back, and Dutch is still talking about Mr. Ron Wright about Reno Riggins.
The video that you brought, Ron, on Reno Riggins, and Reno has joined us right here, and you have something to tell him?
Yeah, I've got something, and I wanted to talk to this man. I brought some videos here and show to you. You've got some real, raw potential in this wrestling world. If you had an old pro like the legendary Ron Wright to get you out there and give you a little pointers and a little coaching, let's hear it from you. I could take a man like you that's got the real raw, uncut diamond talent like you have and probably make a star out of you like I've done with this Dirty White Boy. Now, I've kind of been mulling this over in my mind, talk to the Dirty White Boy. If you'd come in and sign a contract with me, we'd let you go around to all of the matches. You might have to polish a Dirty White Boy's belt, maybe polish my boots, carry his bags in, but you would be associated with the top wrestler in the world and the top manager in the world. Are you grasping what I'm telling you, son? But being in our presence, our talents, and my mind and my ability, I'm going to implant it right up there in your brain and probably make you the second best wrestler in the world. Now, what would you say about putting your name on the dotted line in a contract for me, huh?
Well, Mr. Wright, it's true that you do manage the Dirty White Boy, and he is the Smoky Mountain Heavyweight Champion. So he's tops here in the Smoky Mountain area, and you're a legend in your own right. And that's an awful lot because nobody here in Smoky Mountain has really taken the opportunity to speak with me about anything like this. And I just... I tell you, Mr. Wright, since I came here to Smoky Mountain, I've always wanted to be a champion. I know being a champion takes a lot of hard work, and you're offering me this right now. If you wouldn't mind, I would kind of like to think on it a little bit if you'd give me a chance to do that.
Son, you mean you want to think on the offer that the legendary, world-known, renowned professional wrestler, brain of the wrestling empire that I am, you want to think on it? Well, let me tell you something, son. If you think, you better do your thinking short and fast, because a lifetime opportunity like this only comes once in a lifetime to a man that's needing a little more training like you are.
Okay, so Mr. Riggins, you're saying you want to think on it? All righty, you think on it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Down and Dirty tonight, Down and Dirty with Dutch. You heard the offer, and don't go away. We'll be right back. It's a good.
All right. So Reno Riggins has come out to join Mr. Ron Wright. Mr. Wright says, basically what we've been saying. So apparently, great minds think alike here. Me and the venerable Mr. Ron Wright. And Reno has the potential, and he said that if he has the legendary Mr. Ron Wright to teach him and take him under his wing, he might become, one of the all-time greats. And he gives Reno the chance to come under his wing and come under the Dirty White Boys' wing and learn from them, learn from the manager of champions, learn from the Smoky Mountain champion. And he said that Mr. Wright will make him the second best wrestler in the world after the Dirty White Boy. Now, he does say in this part, it's like, in a way, like, this is kind of understandable, but this is the part where you're supposed to go, oh, really? He says that, if he does this, he might have to do things like polish White Boy's car or polish Mr. Wright's boots and carry their bags. But, Reno then cut a promo, and it was suddenly painfully obvious why, he went as far as he did in wrestling, because his promo skills are not that great. But anyway, so basically he says that, he admits, Dirty White Boy is the champion. He says Mr. Ron Wright is a legend. And while he does appreciate the offer, he would like to think about it if Mr. Wright doesn't mind. Mr. Wright does mind. He's offering him the once-in-a-lifetime chance, and this punk isn't, accepting right away. But he's like, okay, told him to think short and fast. And then Dutch is almost threatening Reno, telling him what a good offer this is. And it's kind of weird because, Reno, at the end of the day, most jobbers aren't necessarily babyface or heels. They just are what they are. But at the end of the day, Reno is essentially a babyface jobber here. We especially the highlights we've seen, he's mostly wrestling, the Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorffs of the world. And so you would think, okay, he's just going to come out here and turn this down because, he's, a good, young man. And he doesn't need to be behind, heels like, Dirty White Boy and Mr. Ron Wright, yada, yada, yada. But it's not. He says he wants to think about it. And so this storyline is going to continue here, at least for one more week. We'll see what happens next week. I'll be honest, though, and this is where we've been having some issues here with Smoky Mountain, is they do a lot of repetitive angles. And we mentioned, we mentioned when they was happening, but we also mentioned last week during the Best Of episode, they did 3 hanging angles in fairly quick succession last year. And now this is at least the 3rd time that we're doing an angle, where a manager, former wrestler, is taking another wrestler under his wing to have him learn, etc. The first time was with Dutch and what's his fucking name? Carl Styles. And then whatever happened with Carl Styles happened. Then they had Dutch and Barry Horowitz, which lasted like 2 weeks. And now we have Reno Riggins and Mr. Ron Wright. Now, at the very least, they are, making it a little different here because it's not just like out and out like it was with Dutch and Carl Styles or Dutch and Barry Horowitz. They're doing the, well, let me think about it thing before I go under your wing, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little different, but at the same time, it's like Cornette really wanted this idea where you have the guy underneath someone else's wing and play it out, and then it just, for whatever reason, it just never played out because people just kept leaving for one reason or another. Because I think Horowitz was only here that one TV taping, maybe 2. Either way, it's like he was in and out. So after commercial, we come back and the Stud Stable is here, and they are still looking for a tag team title match, and they're asking Dutch what's going on.
Right now, here's the Stud Stable, Robert Fuller and Jimmy Golden. Jimmy?
Let me say something first here. I got a big question for Dutch. And Dutch, I know that you've got a lot of good words and answers for us, that you got us a title match. When is it signed, sealed, and delivered?
Well, I don't have a title match yet, but I've been working on it. I went down to talk to Bob Armstrong. That don't look like that, Jimmy. I've been trying. I've been in the offices, and Rob, I know y'all want to know an answer here. I was in the offices of Bob Armstrong, and what did he do? He asked me to leave. He said, "Get up and leave." So I got up and left, and he would not even talk to me. He said I was talking out of school, and it wasn't any of my concern. He wanted to talk to you guys.
I don't want to hurt your feelings, man. I don't want to bring you down a notch or nothing, but I got to say this. Maybe you should take a lesson from Jim Cornette. Let's face it, Jim Cornette is a very, very good manager. That's one thing I want to say for him. And there's one thing he does. He takes this team, and let's face it, they're a mediocre team, calls them heavenly bodies. Right away, they get a big football-sized head. They start thinking they're Arnold Schwarzeneggers. That's a great idea, Dutch, see? And what do when you got a bulldog and you're putting him in a big fight, maybe on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all week long, you get him a ragtag, good-for-nothing cur that he can just whoop on. Cornette does that for the heavenly bodies. Let's face it, who's got the pretty right here in Smoky Mountain? You never seen nothing prettier than who, Dutch?
Then you guys.
The Stud Stable. That's exactly right. One thing for sure, Buster, whether it comes down to them standing in our way, whether it comes down to the rock and roll that's got the belts, I'm going to guarantee you this. The first time the Stud Stable steps in the ring with either one of them, we're going to find out who the greatest tag team who ever wrestled in Smoky Mountain Wrestling is.
Well put there. Let me say something about them Rock and Roll Express, your so-called champions. There's you a couple of drugstore toy champions is what you ought to be calling them. We've beat them many times. We can beat them heavenly bodies. Let me tell you a little bit about our background. Let me start with Roy Welch. Our grandfather, who invented professional wrestling, was one of the toughest wrestlers in the whole country. His dad right here, Buddy Fuller, was a great promoter, a great wrestler. My daddy, Billy Golden, was one of the best wrestling promoters in the world today. We're born champions, brother. We deserve a title match. We deserve to get it, Dutch, and we demand it. You got that?
We are going to
I don't care who it takes. We deserve it.
There's been some interesting developments, there's no doubt about it, between these guys, between the rock and roll, and between the heavenly bodies. And speaking of those two,
We'll speak of those two here in a second, but so there is some dissension in the ranks of the Stud Stable, because Dutch has still been unable to get them a tag team title match. We're still waiting for that to occur. And, Stud Stables we've mentioned, they have a point. You have, they've beaten the Rock and Roll Express. They have, and the Heavenly Bodies came in. They got this giant push right at the gate. They call them a mediocre team, and Cornette gave them the heads the size of a football field. And they called the Rock and Roll Express drugstore toilet champions. And then start talking about their legacy. They talk about Roy Welch, their grandfather. They say invented pro wrestling. They talk about Robert Fuller's daddy, Buddy Fuller. They talk about Jimmy Golden's daddy, Billy Golden. And ultimately, at the end, they're demanding a title match. Now, I've been kind of shying away from mentioning this, but if you remember, and I'm pretty sure it was the post-Thanksgiving Thunder episode, in fact, it makes all the sense in the world, because that's when this whole thing started. If you remember, they booked a match for December 12th between the Stud Stable and the Heavenly Bodies. And you're sitting there like, wait a second, it's January 9th. When the hell is this December 12th tag team match? Well, December 12th was the day of this TV taping that's going on right now, and that is going to be coming up here. That match is coming up. It's kind of weird that the way that ended up being, because they never do that. They never do things like, oh, this match is going to be on December 12th, even though on TV it's not airing, I don't think, until January 23rd. I don't know. It's like either they could have just left that part out entirely, especially since it never got brought up again. Because again, like, this angle's been going on for 6 weeks now. The part about them having a match against each other on December 12th was a factor on December 5th or whatever day that was, and that's it. And it never got brought up again. So you'd think, okay, it could have just been edited out. They could have just not said that part. But oh well, here we are. So from here we go back to Knoxville on Christmas night. It's the Rock and Roll Express in a 3-on-2 handicap match against the Heavenly Bodies and Jim Cornette for the Smoky Mountain Tag Team titles. We're joined in progress and shocking, surprisingly. And again, hope you're sitting down for this because this is some late breaking news here. They got the heat on Ricky Morton. I know, right? Who would have thunk it? Cornette is in. He misses a middle rope elbow, which leads to the hot tag. Tom accidentally clotheslines Cornette. The Stud Stable come to ringside. Pritchard loads his boot up and kicked Morton in the back of the head, but Golden was distracting the referee as Corny was begging the referee to turn around and count. The good news is the referee did turn around and count. The bad news, at least for Jim Cornette, it was after Ricky Morton reversed the fortunes and the Rock and Roll Express won. Then the Stud Stable gets back into the ring and they fight with the Heavenly Bodies. Bodies get the best of it with the tennis racket, and eventually Rock and Roll Express come back down and make the save. Golden and Fuller, being fine, upstanding Southern gentlemen that they are, they shook the Rock and Roll Express's hands. And then they laid out the Rock and Roll Express. So, and then, by the way, Tracy Smothers and Tim Horner ran in for the save. But, so to recap, the Rock and Roll Express beat the Heavenly Bodies. The Stud Stable get beat up by the Heavenly Bodies. Rock and Roll Express make the save, and they get beat up by the Stud Stable. So these three teams are very intertwined at this point, and we're going to see where things go here, and we may find out here in a second because Jim Cornette and the Heavenly Bodies have joined the announce desk, and they have something to say.
Right now, the Heavenly Bodies, Jim Cornette. We just saw some of the action there between your team and the Rock and Roll. We heard from the Stud Stable. Jim, there's a lot going on between your team and those other two teams right now.
You know, I guess these people out here being from Tennessee, they think the Stud Stable is something. Well, I'll tell you something. I don't think the Stud Stable is nothing. I think they're sticking their nose in our business, and that's not where it belongs. Now you hear the Fullers and the Goldens talking about their great family legacy, their great history all these years. Let me tell you something. Robert Fuller, the only work that your father ever did was supervised by a man holding a shotgun. And as far as the rest of the stinking family goes, I hear they're going to have a big family reunion. They're going to schedule it just as soon as the parole board meets. But Stud Stable, you better stick your nose in somebody else's business besides the Heavenly Bodies, because we want the Rock and Roll Express, and we ain't in the mood for nobody to get in our way of getting them. We want our belts back.
You know, we have nothing against sandlot football teams. We have nothing against semi-pro baseball players, and we have nothing against minor league hockey players, and we have nothing against Fuller and Golden. As far as small-time regional champions, yeah, they're some of the best. But they should stick to the little armories and the moose lodges and the high schools and leave the international stars, the cable TV, the guys that travel around the entire world, they should leave the big jobs to us. And I'm talking about the Rock and Roll Express. Fuller and Golden, stand aside and let the big boys eat.
You may have beaten people around here, and they might consider you a great team around this area. But the fact of the matter is, since the very inception, since the very first time here at Smoky Mountain Wrestling, the Heavenly Bodies and Jim Cornette have dominated the tag team scene. So Robert Fuller and Jimmy Golden, while they may call you the Stud Stable, and while all these local yokels may know who you are, we want you to know that we are known nationwide, and before it's all done, you'll realize that, and you will know who the Heavenly Bodies and Jim Cornette really are.
I want to say one more thing. Tell your broadcast partner to stick to talking instead of trying to manage or be associated with the Stud Stable. I'd hate to see anything happen to our friendship.
That's right.
I'm sure, fans, we haven't heard the last of this. We're going to be back. We got great action coming up right after this.
All right, so that's actually the last bit of audio we have this week. So Horny says the stud stable are nothing, and they're sticking their nose in the wrong people's business. He gave us the line of the night. Even with Kevin Sullivan being a better total promo, he still gives us the line of the night where he says the stud stable will have a family reunion as soon as the parole board meets. And ultimately, at the end of the day, they want their titles back. Lane goes back to what he said before. He calls the stud stable small-time regional champions, but they need to leave the big job to the international stars, the people who've been on nationwide TV, like Stan Lane and Tom Pritchard, apparently. And Dr. Tom said that people around here may consider Fuller and Golden a great team, but the Heavenly Bodies have dominated the tag team scene here. They are known nationwide, and the stud stable will know who they really are soon enough. Corny tells, and before it ends, Corny tells Cottle to tell Dutch to basically stick to broadcasting. And yeah, they like, and we've mentioned this before because they, we were talking about during this with the Fantastics feud. Corny is doing a lot of his best ideas right away, and it sucks in some way because it's not that it's only going to go down from here, but we're going to see in a couple of years. It's like, man, I wish we would have had, something this hot then when they were like already, when they were smoking, when they were, on as fire as they were going to be. They could have used a really great angle like some of these are, but hey, they're doing what they can to get their name, get the name over, to get the brand over, to get the company over. And like I said, it's just sad that they don't get to capitalize on some of these great angles as much as they should have been able to. So time for the main event. Smoky Mountain Champion Dirty White Boy and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff with Mr. Ron Wright in their corner versus Ronnie Garvin and Tim Horner. As we mentioned, this was not one of their matches from Christmas Chaos. It was a new match. Garvin comes out. He still has his short robe that he stole from Orndorff and then destroyed. The faces ping pong Orndorff in the corner, and Garvin gets a near fall with a small package. Dutch makes a good point here, and I know commentator making a good point, but Dutch makes a good point here by saying that these teams, while they are teams and while they have teamed a couple times, they're not actual tag teams. They are singles wrestlers put in a tag team situation, which is basically your way of saying, yeah, they're top guys. Yeah, they're wrestling in a tag team match. And yeah, one team is better than the other team. However, there's a reason they're not wrestling for the tag team titles, because they're just two great singles wrestlers while the tag team champions are a great tag team. So Orndorff gets the heat on Garvin with an uppercut, and then the heels briefly double team Garvin as we go to a commercial. I want to say, I have to point out, they do the local promos that we never really air, but during the local promos, Ricky Morton has this big ass fucking tennis racket. He has this giant ass tennis racket that he plans on using on Jim Cornette. Okay then. Unfortunately, at least, as of at this point, we have not seen this big ass tennis racket within the scope of the television program. I can't wait to see if it shows up. Back to the match, Garvin made the tag, but it was the gimmick where the referee didn't see it, and he holds Horner back while the heels drag Garvin back to their corner. Horner kept getting into the ring anyway, which made the referee yank him back while the heels continued to double team Garvin. Garvin muled kicked Dirty White Boy into the groin, but got cut off again. Finally, Garvin and White Boy collided mid-ring, and Garvin tagged out. Horner, in his hometown, got a bit of a tepid reaction, but he did, in fact, run wild. A four-way broke out. Mr. Ron Wright gave Dirty White Boy a foreign object. Garvin threatened to beat up Mr. Wright, and somehow Orndorff ended up with the foreign object, and he knocked Horner the fuck out for the win. So, yeah, that is it here. The heels get the win here in the tag team match. And this is actually it for Ronnie Garvin. Don't know if he cuts any promos, but this is the last we're going to see of Ronnie Garvin. It was actually, obviously it was taped before Christmas Chaos, but this is his last broadcast match, or his last match that happens here in Smoky Mountain. So at the end of the day, thank you for the 6 months, Ronnie. For the most part, it was really enjoyable, even dating back to the original part where he came in as primetime Brian Lee's partner to assist during the Summer Blast, I think it was. And then he ended up sticking around for a while, which honestly, like I said, I forgot. I thought he was, I knew he wasn't one and done because I knew he did the singles match with Orndorff, but I thought like that was it. He was in and out in, 6 weeks or something. But no, he was here a good length of time, which, hey, it gave credibility to the company. Having these big stars like Garvin and Paul Orndorff, it showed this was more than just an indie show on TV. This was something where stars went to, and so the show kind of just ends really quickly after the match ends. They announce the TV champion will be crowned, and Caudle says that next week Kevin Sullivan will wrestle the Stalker. And that's how the show ended. Ultimately, like, especially the way this thing was edited, like this ended up being kind of a weird show just because it was edited so tightly to get into 50 minutes. And to be honest, they were cutting out entrances. They were like going into the middle of shit. You could have just not aired that Chris Comet match and no one would have been the wiser and no one would have cared. Let's be honest. But so that does it for this week's episode of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. 50 down, 150 to go. We are officially 25% of the way through this show. Can you believe it? But before we go, we like to do is tell you what else is happening this week in wrestling. Because I can tell you January 9th, 1993 until I'm blue in the face. However, sometimes you need context so hey, okay, I may not know January 9th off the top of my head, but I know this. This happened at this time? Yeah, it did. Specifically, that Ric Flair is expected to debut at the WCW Super Brawl 3 pay-per-view and challenge Barry Windham after Barry Windham's match with the Great Muta, where Windham is expected to win the NWA title. The main event of Super Brawl 3 is going to be Sting versus Vader and a White Castle of Fear match, which is a strap match and not a hamburger eating contest. Clash of the Champions 22 was this week, and it was a confusing mess as the main event 8-man tag team cage match was somehow whittled down to a 3-on-2 handicap match, and Cactus Jack cemented his babyface turn by running in and pinning Smoky Mountain's own Paul Orndorff. Elsewhere on the show, Steamboat and Shane Douglas beat Pillman and Austin by DQ, and a feud was set up with, of all people, Van Hammer and Vinny Vegas. And then, and no, I'm not going to forget this part, the other major happening that happened this week or this weekend in history. The WWF debuted Monday Night Raw. Monday Night Raw episode number 1, season 1, episode 1, occurred this weekend, and ultimately it was considered a bad show. The main complaint was Rob Bartlett was the color commentator, completely unprepared. He didn't know which Steiner brother was which, and then he also talked about how new monster heel Yokozuna needed a bra. For those curious, the first match ever on Monday Night Raw was Yokozuna versus Koko Beware. The first main event was Undertaker versus Damien Demento. It also had a Steiner Brothers match and Shawn Michaels versus Max Moon. That was the first episode of Raw. And it's on Peacock if you want to go check it out. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Re-Watch-Along Project. Obviously made up for last week when I squeezed it into 30 minutes. Hopefully you all enjoyed this. We are in 1993. It's full steam ahead. We'll see what the future holds. Thank you all for listening. And, we will talk to you again in 7 days.